Those of you who are joining us online, welcome. We're glad you're here as well. I'm assuming we're live? Yeah? Wonderful. Okay. Welcome, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rabbi Black. I think you figured that out. That's why I'm here. My goal tonight is to share some thoughts. I mean, how many of you read my missives that I sent? I was... Good, I'm glad. So I will be sharing a little bit of that, but I was just telling Shirley Asher, instead of chronologically, I kind of want to present it thematically to help me process. I mean, I spent, it was really 5 days, 4 days of a mission, 5 days on the ground, and then 2 days traveling, basically. So it was a lot. And, whenever you go to Israel, you always want to do as much as you can. This was, as I'm going to talk about, different than any other trip, but we were constantly going. And then I was up late writing because I needed to write to help process, and I felt I wanted you guys to know what was going on as well. So I'm tired, but it's a good tired. It's an important one. So I want to begin by sort of saying what the group was that I was part of. And I was part of a solidarity mission to Israel sponsored by 3 different organizations, all of which are important. One of them is the World Union for Progressive Judaism, which is the international reform movement. And this was an international trip, although we had people from South America, mostly, America and Canada on the trip. ARTSA is the American Reform Zionist Association. That is the Zionist movement of the Reform movement, which we are a part. And Artseinu is the international version of ARTSA. So it's not just American Reform Zionists, but it's the international group. Some of you may remember that in April, I went as a delegate to the World Zionist Congress, and as a delegate, I was also representing those 3 organizations. So there was a lot of crossover from our experience at the Zionist Congress. A lot of the same people. We were with leaders of the movement from around the world. It was a really interesting group. Not only rabbis. Rabbis were actually in the minority of the group. Here's a picture of us in front of the Knesset. That's me on the left. There's about 6 rabbis. The treasurer of the Reform movement, the head of the president of ARTSA. This is Rabbi Josh Weinberg, who's a friend of ours who's spoken here. Often Josh is our representative. Is the head of ARTSA and a wonderful leader. Lots of lay leaders on the board of the Union of Reform Judaism, on the board of ARTSA and Artseinu, and it was a group that I was very proud of being with. This was a trip unlike any other trip I've ever taken to Israel. Sue and I have traveled many, many, many times. I have no idea how many trips I've taken. 30 maybe? I really don't know. I lost track. But we've been there during terror attacks. We've been there when war has broken out. We were there with groups and individuals. In my first year of rabbinical school was 1982 when the first Lebanese war, the Lebanese conflict happened. This felt different. And it felt different for a lot of reasons, mostly because in other times, Israelis pride themselves in the fact that there can be something going on, but we're not going to allow that to impact us. We're going to keep on going. This trip felt like the entire country is in mourning, and we'll see that and how that played out in just a moment. And I think it's important for us to sort of put the date of October 7th, 2023, Simchat Torah, as a day that will be remembered in history, a day that things change, much like the War of Independence or the Six-Day War, the Yom Kippur War, and now what we're calling the Simchat, I don't know what we'll call it, the Simchat Torah massacre or pogrom, I'm not sure what we will call it, but it will be part of our history lessons, and we have lived through that part of history. And there's no doubt that it will be commemorated, perhaps with a special liturgy and prayers like Kristallnacht, November 9th, 1938, or even Pearl Harbor Day in our country, or 9/11. The fact that 1,400 people were massacred on a single day, not just massacred, but raped and murdered and beheaded and savagely, and the savageness of the attack, and that the precipitated understanding that the current status quo with Hamas cannot be tolerated, which precipitated the war, which we're seeing playing out in front of our TV screens, and all of the other issues that surround it, need to be understood that this was a day unlike any other in the history of the Jewish state and the history of the world. I really believe in the Jewish people in particular. This is not just a war between Israel and Hamas. This impacts all of us directly, as we're seeing play out with the rise in anti-Semitism, the demonstrations, the anti-Jewish rhetoric, not just the anti-Zionist rhetoric that we're seeing. So we are in the midst of a change, a major sea change that we're just beginning to understand right now, which is why I think so many of us are tired, and it just impacts us in ways that we've never been impacted before. We're in a time of existential crisis. I believe that. Not because Israel is in danger of being defeated militaristically, although we're waiting to see what's going to happen on the northern front. And if other nations like Iran and the United States could be drawn into this, that will be a game changer. But at this point, it's an existential crisis because the rhetoric that we're seeing around the world is not, Israel is being unfair or Israel is being cruel, but does Israel actually have a right to exist? That we haven't seen since 1948. And yet, the message I want to leave us with tonight is not one of despair, because I'm not despairing. I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm frightened, but I don't despair because I also saw things of great beauty and hope that played out even amidst this crisis. We are emerging in Israel out of a time of severe political division and alienation to a country that literally has reshaped itself overnight, without the help of a government, by the way. The government is in a very weak place right now, and into one large family that is both grieving and working to support each other. And to put this into context, there are 250,000 Israelis right now that are refugees. We don't hear about this a lot, but the Gaza envelope, all of the villages not only that were attacked, but those that surrounded them within about a 7-mile radius, or maybe even more, I don't know that's exact number, have all been evacuated overnight. And they're staying in hotels in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, in Haifa, throughout the country. Also, the Galilee has been evacuated. Sue's cousins were founders of Kibbutz O, right on the Lebanese border. They are all living now outside of Haifa and every other major community. So you've got 250,000 people who overnight were uprooted and are staying either with family or in hotels, many in hotels, and we'll see that in just a moment. Almost every hotel in Israel's major cities, there's no tourists, so there's very few tourists, but they are full of refugees. This doesn't mean, of course, that there aren't fierce divisions within Israeli society today. It wouldn't be Israel without fierce divisions. There are political divisions, there are religious divisions, cultural, economic, moral, and ethical debates occurring all the time. The purpose of this trip was designed to help leaders of our movement see both the trauma and the triumph of Israeli society. So I want to talk about, this was our itinerary. I don't know if you can see it, but I will walk through it. So first night, Sunday, November 26th, I got in late, so I got the end of the dinner, which is okay. But we met in a beautiful restaurant, Theal Shilshom, which is one of my favorite restaurants in Jerusalem. It's this sort of literary cafe. The name Theal is like, as though it were yesterday. It's a poem from Shai Agnon, the brilliant poet laureate of the State of Israel. And we met with leaders of the Israel Movement for Progressive Judaism. That is IMPJ. You may hear me saying that a lot. That is the reform movement in Israel, which is has grown incredibly. There are over 100 reform rabbis now that were Israeli rabbis ordained by the Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem, serving congregations and communities. There are the Israel Religious Action Center. You may recall a few years ago we brought Anat Hoffman here, who is the former head of the Israel Religious Action Center, who works in the courts. We met with representatives. Our Reform movement has a seat at the table in the Sochnut, basically the federation, and the reason is that because people voted in the Zionist Congress, which allocated, and I will talk about that as the next elections come up, allocated various portfolios and were given in the Sochnut, in the what's a translation of Sochnut? It's sort of I can't think of it. The Jewish Jaffe. Basically Jewish Federation's big organization. And the Reform movement has a major voice because of the fact that we as Reform Jews around the world voted to allocate those funds. And I'm going to talk more about that later again. Our first day, Monday, we spent the day in the South. We did not deliberately go to the communities that were attacked. The leadership made a choice not to do that. We could have, but we didn't want to do this sort of like voyeuristic tourism. We've seen pictures. There are horrible stories. We know what happened, but we didn't want to that was sacred ground. We did visit communities on the periphery and meet with people who were impacted by that. We also met with members of the Bedouin community, and I'll talk about that in just a moment, because they're very important to this story. The Bedouin Arabs who live in the South. The next day, we met with another evacuated community in Nachal Oz, which is in the Jezreel Valley, and met with some important people that I'll talk about in a moment. Then we went up to Haifa. We went to the Leo Baeck School, which you may have read in my comments. I was a student at the Leo Baeck School in 1975. Some of it hasn't changed at all. Some of it has changed a lot. But they're doing amazing work with Jewish-Arab peace in the north. And then we visited Congregation Or Chadash, which is a thriving, vibrant Reform congregation in the north, and saw the work that they are doing to help the displaced persons in their community. The next day, we studied in the morning at the Hebrew Union College about Pidyon Shvuyim, which is the commandment to redeem captives. And how that is actually playing out in real life. Then we went to the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. We met with Rabbi Gilad Kariv, a Reform rabbi, who's the first Reform rabbi to serve as a member of Knesset for the Labor Party, as well as one other member of Knesset as well, Idan Rol, who's not part of the Labor Party, but is also a friend of the Reform movement. And then we met with Reform rabbis in Israel to talk about the work that they're doing to help them process the hard work of comforting their congregation who have been impacted. And we were then, our roles were to be emissaries, our roles were to be pastoral presence, our roles were to be witnesses and to report back to the congregations that we serve in the communities, as I'm doing now. We then met with families of those held hostage, and we met with young people who have given a year before their army service, much like our Shinshinim do here, working within the Reform movement in Tel Aviv. Then one of the most powerful moments was going to Kikar HaChatufim, which is the hostages square, and I'm going to talk a lot about that in a moment, outside of the Tel Aviv Museum. And the last day, we did some more studying. We met with Rabbi Michael Marmer and Michal Mushkat Barkan about what does it mean to have doubt? What does it mean to be an activist? And what does it mean to question our own actions all the time, which is an essential part of activism? We went to the Hamal. Hamal is a Hebrew acronym that basically means a command center. And it's a military term that has been used to talk about these command centers that have been set up overnight. We'll talk about what those are in just a moment. Then we went to Hadassah Hospital. We visited with people who had been injured at our final banquet. and left. I stayed an extra day to spend time with some dear friends of mine, and I also went back to Hostage Square as well. So I'm going to divide this into different areas. The first area I want to talk about is our role as bearing witness to the trauma that Israel is experiencing right now. So this slide shows a picture, not a great picture, but is a picture of a remarkable person. His name is Kher Albaz. This is him here in the middle. He is a Bedouin man who, along with Vivian Silver, a name you may be familiar with, she was someone who was murdered in the attack. Vivian Silver was a woman who was spent her entire work trying to make peace between Arabs and Jews. She and Mr. Albaz created an organization that worked to build bridges of peace between Arabs and Jews. The organization is called the Arab Jewish Center for Equality, Empowerment, and Cooperation, or AJEC. And they have a vision of a shared society. And he talked about this, that it's, we talk about coexistence between Palestinians, between Arabs and Israeli Jews. I don't want coexistence. I want to create a society together that's shared. Now, the Bedouin community in the south is a fascinating community. They are originally nomadic. They can't really be that more because as more and more land is developed, they live in settlements. Some of them are legal settlements, which means that they have services provided by the Israeli government. Some of them are not recognized, so recognized and unrecognized. There is a conflict right now in Israeli society when you look at Bedouin society, because these unrecognized societies have been in these places for hundreds of years, but they're not recognized by the Israeli government, so they don't have services like, for example, air raid shelters, bomb shelters, schools, education, and it's a problem. We went to a place called Kfar Huna, which is a Bedouin village, which is part of Israeli society, and the stories we heard there of Bedouins who rescued, I don't know if you've heard any of these stories, that the day of the attack at the festival, many of the young people who went there got rides from Bedouin taxi drivers to get down there. And when the taxi drivers heard what was happening, they literally risked their lives to go back and bring people back. They're remarkable stories of bravery, of dedication not only to the people they saved, but to the state of Israel itself. So this is an example of how Arabs and Jews are cooperating together, and we owe them an incredible debt. We then went to Kibbutz Dorot. Kibbutz Dorot is just outside, there's different rings of the Gaza. There's those kibbutzim and villages that were right up against Gaza that were attacked. Then there's a whole nother layer that's about 1.5 miles away. You could see them, but they were not attacked. But there were plans to attack those villages as well. There's 3 people that I want to point out. These 3 people here. This is Rabbi Yael Vargan, who's a Reform rabbi serving this area, and I'll talk about these rabbis. And these are 2 other members of the kibbutz who did not leave. And I don't want, their names are not important. Well, Yael and Sharon are their names. They decided they're going to stay, and most people left. And so to look at this kibbutz, this beautiful kibbutz Dorot, it's like a ghost town, and things are just frozen in time. You can see the toys on the lawn where people left to go. But these 2 decided they were going to stay. They weren't going to leave. And so we talked about them. And then Yael Vergan is the rabbi of this community. Now, what the Reform movement has done in Israel is they've assigned rabbis to different regions rather than congregate. They also have congregations, but there are many regions that people they don't want rabbis, but they need them, and they didn't realize they needed them until they came. They're all women, by the way. The vast majority of Israeli Reform rabbis are women, and they are remarkable, the way that they have served their congregations. Now, those who are in this area don't live there anymore. So, because they've been evacuated. So these rabbis are going from kibbutz to kibbutz, to hotel, to area, to meet the needs, to counsel, to bury sometimes, to cry with, to hold the hands of, and to support their people, their congregants. Sort of roving rabbis. And everyone in Israel is touched in some way, but everyone in these areas know people who've been killed. The two women that you see here talked about the fact that they understood that there were diagrams of their homes that the terrorists had, and they said this one has a single person, this one has a dog, this one. They knew exactly what was in every single building in every single kibbutz, and they said, who told them this? Probably the gardeners that we had working for us, the people from Gaza who would come back and forth that we trusted. Now, and then Yael, not Yael. Sharon said, look, am I angry at these people for doing that? Yes and no, because they were probably threatened that if they didn't give us this information, Hamas would kill their families. So that kind of resilience is remarkable. I want to show you pictures here. These are 3 pictures that I did not share online. This is the hotel that we stayed in Jerusalem. And these are all refugees from different communities in the Gaza envelope who were staying at the Dan Panorama Hotel. So you walk into the Dan Panorama, and you see kids riding by on scooters and doing homework, and mothers like screaming at them, and you see elderly people sitting at tables and playing cards and talking, and this is the town square of these villages that were uprooted from the Negev and now were transferred to a hotel in Jerusalem. And this plays out in every hotel, almost every hotel. Some hotels don't, and we're not patronizing those hotels. But I mean, like even the Orient Hotel, which is a very, very luxurious hotel, has these refugees, many of whom are very poor. They come from poor families, but they have no place to go. And so they are being housed, they are being fed, they are being clothed, and I'll talk about how that's happening later on. We also went to, where am I here? We went to Kibbutz Nachal Oz. We went to Kibbutz Mishmar HaEmek in the Jezreel Valley, which opened its doors to refugees from Kibbutz Nachal Oz, which was one of the kibbutz that was attacked. Who you see here in front of you, this may be a familiar face, it's Amir Tibon, who is a journalist. I don't know if you saw the 60 Minutes thing about his father, who was a colonel in the army. And when they were being attacked and the army was not coming, he called his father, who got in his Jeep, drove through, rescued other people, and came and rescued Amir and his family. Amir is a writer for Haaretz. He is a strong critique of the Netanyahu government, but that has nothing to do with anything. He's a remarkable teacher, writer, and leader. These are other refugees from Kibbutz Nachal Oz that met with our group, and we sort of gave them a small group. They told us their stories, who they were, why they were there, what they experienced, and the stories were horrific. We were in Tel Aviv, and you may have seen this picture. I sent one of my updates about it. This is Lee and Shelley Siegel. Lee's brother Keith is still captive somewhere in Gaza, and his wife and Keith, his sister-in-law Aviva, was recently freed during the time that we were there. And he was not able to share what she has experienced because she hasn't been able to share it yet. We will hear a lot of those stories as later on as the history unfolds. These are both from Kibbutz Kfar Aza. They have said that they have received help from many different places. This meeting took place in Beit Daniel, which is a center for Reform Judaism in Jaffa. My friend Rabbi Meir Azari, whom I went to the Leo Beck School in Haifa with, is the rabbi there. They talked about how there are groups set aside just to help the hostages' families, the Hostage Family Forum. They came together overnight to support, to grieve, to lobby, to raise funds, and work to bring the hostages home. I'll talk more about the movement, to how we're supporting those families in just a moment. We spent a lot of time studying together during this trip. This is Rabbi Dalia Marx, Dr. Dalia Marx, who just published a wonderful book. It just came out yesterday, actually, on Jewish life cycle events. She's a professor of the Hebrew Union College. She taught us texts on Pidyon Shvuyim. Pidyon Shvuyim is the Jewish command to free the captives. Every Shabbat morning we say, "Blessed are you, Adonai, who frees the captive." It is a very important mitzvah, and the question is, to what lengths do you go to free captives? Do you sell a Sefer Torah? do you risk the lives of other things? How much money do you... I mean, there's a whole debate and discussion about this, which is going on currently in Israel, as you can imagine, because one of the tensions that we are experiencing in Israel right now is the current military offensive going to save the captives or not? And there are some in the Netanyahu government who say, we can't think about the captives, we must flatten Gaza. And others who say we have to be more careful. There was, the last night that I was there, actually the night that I flew, there was a huge demonstration in Tel Aviv, in Kikar HaChatufim, in the hostage square, to free the captives. And that's a tension that is playing out within Israeli society. We also learned from Rabbi Michael Marmer, who's a professor of Jewish theology, and Dr. Michal Muscat Barkan, who's the head of the Department of Education and Professional Development at the Hebrew Union College. And we studied Jewish texts on activism. Why is it important for us to be active and to work to make change in the community? And also the importance of doubt. That, oftentimes we will say we can't afford to be wrong. We are right and everyone who's against us is wrong. But that's actually not what the Talmud teaches, that it's important to have doubt. You need to question yourself all the time. And how we do that, and that's another thing that we see playing out in Israel, because there are those who are absolutely determined that there is only one right way, and anyone who opposes that right way is a traitor. And this plays out also here in America. If you dare question what's happening, then are you a disloyal Jew? Are you a disloyal Zionist? And these are questions that I don't have an answer, by the way, but these are the kind of things we were exploring together. That we can't have absolute certainty, because this is a world where there are a lot of things that are not certain. Dr. Muscat Barkan is a very fascinating person. She was one of the organizers of the protests, the weekly protests in Jerusalem. And she and her colleagues created an incredible system of organized protest. And during her protest, she said, we wanted to hear voices of people that made us uncomfortable. So she talked about how she brought in Arab voices. She brought in voices from the religious right. She brought in voices from the far left. That anyone who would go to these protests and just expect to hear an echo chamber were sorely disappointed. But that was so important, because if you're truly going to protest, you need to create a very diversified coalition. They shared a document with us that I want to read. I'll read it because I don't think you can see it. This is a document that came from Mar'am, which is the Israeli Association of Reform Rabbis, and the Reform Movement. This is Hatnu'ah HaReformit, the Reform Movement in Israel. And this is Mar'am, Mo'etzet HaRabbanim HaMitkabim BeYisrael, the group of progressive rabbis in Israel. And they wrote, quoting, "For you will do what is good and right in the eyes of Adonai your God," from Deuteronomy 12:28. And this is a translation, obviously. "We find ourselves in difficult and painful times when the people of Israel are dealing with loss and suffering like we have not known since the establishment of the state. Our hearts ache for the thousands of murdered victims, for the hundreds who were kidnapped, and for the wounded. The soul recoils from the atrocities and unimaginable massacres perpetrated by those who have lost their humanity." Full stop. "We all pray that all those who serve in the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, and the other security forces, including many of our friends, sons, and daughters on the front lines and the home front, those guarding us day and night, remain safe." Just a pause here. Understand that we talk about the army in America, and most of us don't have strong connections to people in the army. Everyone in Israel is either in the army, was in the army, or has children or parents in the army. So the army is not some abstract other. It is the state. It is the people. It is their heart and their soul. In these difficult moments, alongside the fighting, we must ensure that we act with tolerance and humanity towards all citizens of Israel, members of all sectors and religions, including the Arab public. Even in moments of fierce fighting, we must not smear an entire public because of the cruelty committed by Hamas. We must not discriminate against the Arab public, and we must reject manifestations of incitement and racism. We must also remember now, especially now, that, quote, "Beloved is a person created in the image of God." end quote. That the state of Israel is built on the foundations of preserving the divine human image and the dignity of all its citizens and residents in the spirit of the Declaration of Independence. We pray for days of peace and serenity and call on political and religious leaders to lower the flames. We need to remember that we will continue to live together on this land, Jews and Arabs, even after the fierce fighting. Therefore, it is our duty to work to preserve the foundation of a shared life based on respect, equality, and tolerance. This week, as we read the Torah portion Lech Lecha, that was written right after the attack, we remember that we are all the sons and daughters of Abraham, the father of Isaac and Ishmael. We will continue our journey to the promised land, a land of peace and dignity for every human being. Have we not all one Father? Did not one God create us? That's from the book of Malachi. It's a very powerful statement. It says where our movement in Israel is going and what the values that we are trying to implement there. And the question of what's going to happen after the fighting is over is one that was touched upon, but no one knows the answer. And that is something that, can you have a plan for a surprise attack? The question of why wasn't this attack expected? And there was information, I'm sure many of you have seen those reports, that there was very clear information about this attack that was coming, but it came from a group of women. And the powers that be sort of discounted it. The government did not believe that Hamas would do this. They felt a policy of placating Hamas and giving them some freedom and some economic sustenance was going to keep them happy. Obviously, that was woefully, criminally wrong. And what's going to happen with the government now in the aftermath of this war is there's no doubt that they're going to be they should be disbanded. I'll talk more about that later on. So this document really talks about some of the tension within Israel today, that there are those on the far right who want to just demolish Hamas. Everyone understands that Hamas needs to be destroyed. The question is at what cost and what are the civilian casualties as well. Add into that the question of the hostages and it becomes even more complex. So this was at the Knesset. On the left is Rabbi Gilad Kariv. I've known Gilad for many, many years. He used to be the head of the Reform movement in Israel. This is Josh Weinberg next to him, Rabbi Weinberg. He is a brilliant rabbi, politician. It was just a joy to know that he is representing our movement. And then the next person is Ilan Rol, who is a member of Knesset from the Yesh Atid party, which is slightly to the right, not too much, of the Labor Party. He's a fascinating person. He is a former fashion model. He is a gay activist. He and his husband have a child together, and he's a member of Knesset. And just remember that these are people all sitting together from extraordinarily different places on the political spectrum. Both Gilad and Ilan reinforce the fact that Israel is facing an existential crisis. And I think that word cannot be said enough. Both had harsh words of condemnation for the current government, their failures of communication, their failures of conduct, their failure to act. And here's the other piece. The current coalition understands that its days are numbered. Rather than try and build consensus, what we see happening, trying to build a sense of bringing people together, their current actions are basically trying to do all that they can to get as much money out of the government before they're thrown out. And I say this with anger and regret, but it is happening. There was a recent article just yesterday I read in Haaretz, I think, about how the current coalition is, the government, the budget in Israel is taking a huge hit because there's no tourism, industry has come to a halt, everything has come to a halt. And so they have to cut, but rather than, now is the time of budget making. Rather than make those kind of cuts, they've actually increased funds going to ultra-Orthodox schools. And not only are they increasing funds going to ultra-Orthodox schools, because that's a huge part of the coalition, but they also have taken away requirements for teaching of basic things like science, math, English. And so these ultra-Orthodox schools, many of them are raising up functional illiterates who will not be able to be part of a society other than the ultra-Orthodox society, become a drain, a welfare state, and not contribute and continue a cycle of poverty, of ignorance, of bigotry that we see happening in the ultra-Orthodox world. I've spoken about this before, but it just infuriated me. I'll give you an example. We went to the Knesset, and we looked at the docket of what bills were being debated. The first thing on the list, not most important, but the first one that was being debated that day was a bill to allocate money to raise red heifers. Okay, do you know what a red heifer is? A red heifer is, there's a passage in the book of I think it's Numbers, that in order to have certain sacrifices in the Temple of Jerusalem, you need the ashes of a pure, unblemished red heifer with not a white hair on it. Okay, so that the heifer is sacrificed, its ashes are ground up, and it's used for purification rituals, right? This is for when the third temple is going to be rebuilt. So there are people in the government who are actively promoting and spending government money to rebuild the third temple. Okay, theologically, let's say you can do that, but it's such it's an obscenity as far as I'm concerned. The government is completely dysfunctional right now. They're not present. There was a story I heard the other day of a minister who went to visit someone in the hospital. And when the family saw him, they screamed at him to get out. So much so that the patient started having palpitations. The doctor screamed at them to leave. They have not visited any of the communities in the Gaza envelope because they know they would not be welcomed. They are despised by a vast majority of Israeli public right now. It's wartime. There is a wartime government, but as soon as this is over, they are going to, first of all, go on trial. There's going to be an inquiry, and the corruption and the malfeasance of this government is inexcusable. Ask me how I feel about that. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is grieving, and that to understand that the entire nation is grieving. And I likened it to going to a shiva, where we have to bring comfort. The most powerful place where this is experienced is, of course, Kikar Chatufim, this sort of square. It's Kikar means square. Chatufim are those who were captured. I'm sure many of you have seen this image before. I shared it. It's a table set for all the hostages, and you'll see there are high chairs, and there are. And as some of the hostages have been returned, over 100 have been returned, so they're taken away. But it's a very powerful image. But that's not the only thing here. We see things like art projects. I shared this photograph too. This is a poem. It's actually a song that was written in the Yom Kippur War in 1973. That we are the children. Let's see. I didn't have the right. We are the children of the summer of 1973, but it was changed. We are the children of the fall of 2020. The fall of 1973. Now we're the children of the fall of 2023. And there are all these little blindfolded dolls. This is, I don't know if I shared this picture or not. This is a man who was standing there dressed as a sad clown with a picture of his relative who was kidnapped. The other thing we see in Kikar Chatufim is that each community that was destroyed has a tent that they've set up in this square in Tel Aviv in the Art Museum. And there's circles of chairs that people sit in. Some of the members of the community come there and find comfort. Again, it's a shiva, so they are comforted by the community. There are daily events. I shared some video on Facebook, and I don't know if you saw that and I'm not sure it came through in the emails, there are all kinds of demonstrations. I led a healing service at Kikar Chatufim from our group. They asked me to lead some songs and healing prayers, which was an honor that I was very moved by the opportunity to do so. This is I'm wearing around my neck this little dog tag, and on it says. No, I can't take it off because I'm here. I can't take it off because of the microphone. But it says, "We are all We are all held in prison in Gaza right now." It says, and then it says, "Bring the hostages home." And now I am. Hold on a second. I got to do this. Colin and I will fix this in a moment, I promise. Have a look. Okay. Maybe I won't. All right, I'm just going to try and figure this out here. There we go. Okay. Sorry, those of you online. It says here, Halev shalanu shavui ba'aza. Our hearts are in captive in Gaza. Bring them home now. And you see all over Israel people wearing these dog tags everywhere you go. It's like wearing a blue ribbon that people have here as well. This is one of the most powerful things I saw. This is on Dizengoff Street. If you've ever been to Dizengoff Street in Tel Aviv, it is the main. It's a street filled with cafes and pubs, and it's a place where people go. That when I was 1975, my first time in Israel, we were taught a verb, lehizdangef, Dizengoff, right? Which means to actually go to Dizengoff Street and get ice cream and, all kinds of things. And there are all these benches, and on these benches, I just showed there are 3 of them, but there are about 20 of these teddy bears that have, see if I can make that bigger. You can see they have blood stains on them, and some of them carry pictures of some of the hostages. Oops. Okay. It's very, very powerful. And, again, I've been there. This is already 60 days into the crisis, practically. But they've been there all along. While I was there, I sent this back in an email. I was there during the pause. So there were not that many rockets that were being shot into Israel while we were there because it was a ceasefire. The day I left, I was at the airport. You can see where I circled it. There was an alarm, and we had to hide in a stairwell. Most of these rockets they don't land because, first of all, they're very crude. They're made with the materials that was given to Hamas to build infrastructure and sewer pipes. So instead of making sewer pipes, they made rockets, which is one of the reasons that that Gaza is in such disrepair right now, is because all of the money, the billions of dollars that was poured in by Arab countries to build the infrastructure of Gaza was used instead to dig tunnels, to build weapons and rockets. And so these rockets are not well launched. They're not aimed. Most of them are taken out by the Iron Dome system. But this was Saturday night. How many different rockets were fired in that one night? And this is where I was, and so we had to take shelter. We were fine. It was not a big deal. So the next thing I want to talk about is how the society in Israel is coming together, and how this crisis has created incredible resilience and in some cases even beauty in Israel. The first place I want to talk about, this is the Hamal. This is the outside of the Hamal, or the command center. Now, Hamal is a military term, and on the day after the crisis, the organizers, remember I talked about Michal from HUC, who organized the protests in Jerusalem. These protests that went on for 6 months were hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Israelis every Saturday night would come together and protest after the government, were well organized, and they were totally grassroots. But the organizers had lists of names. They had WhatsApp groups that they've put together. They had lists. And so the next day, a call went out to help those in need. And again, there's 250,000 people who were evacuated in a day. And so they said, who has needs and who has ways to offer help? And the thousands, tens of thousands of people who came together to organize, and these are young people who are very computer savvy. They put together Google Docs and Excel spreadsheets, and they quickly organized. This is an arts center in Jerusalem, and there was an owner of a theater, or the head of a theater, who said, take the whole theater. It's like a 4-story building with a big auditorium and stage. And in this building, you see volunteers. So they have phone desks. And one of the things that I thought was awesome was that the young people were teaching the old people. One person said, I got to teach my university professor who just gave me a bad grade on a test. And they work together on phones, and everyone has their cell phone, everyone has their own computer. this is the sort of welcome. And so to receive donations, to make connections. Let's say a soldier needs to get to his base in the far north, but has no way to get there. Someone else is a driver. I will drive soldiers. Parents need baby clothes, baby formula, toilet paper. The stockpiles, here's an example of just a little bit, and this is towards the end. The government is now stepping up to do this, or starting to do this, but for 2 months the government did nothing. And so this was all lay organized and remarkably organized to get supplies, to get help, to get doctor's appointments, to get whatever you need. Toilet paper, dish soap, baby formula, military uniforms. They raised money for medical equipment. They raised 12 million shekel, which is about $4 million, just from Israelis. This doesn't count the money that was raised by the United States, that was given to and the world Jewry, to buy a mobile ICU unit for medics in the field. I just read of another organization that's part of this Hamal that is buying small drones that can go into houses to see if they're booby-trapped. Whatever is needed, and there's a list, there's a group of people who understand what's needed, there's a situation to get it out there. It is incredible to see what they have done, inspiring to see what they have done. University students aren't in classes right now, so most of them are out volunteering. The other thing that needs to happen is there are crops that can't be picked because there are no Palestinian workers right now. All the foreign workers left, although many were there were many foreign workers who were killed and captured by Hamas and who were wounded in the hospital. We went to visit some at Hadassah Hospital in Har Hatzofim. So that people are volunteering to go pick crops. Lawyers, bankers, architects, models, they're all out in the fields picking crops. We were going to, but it was rainy that day, which is good for me because I forgot to bring a pair of shoes. So I would have ruined a nice pair of shoes, but that's another discussion. This is a picture that my friend Eddie sent me that tells a lot. This is a family, and those are army uniforms drying. How many people in that family are serving their country? Sorry. I'm going to end with this photograph. The last night we were there, we ate at a restaurant in the Jerusalem Botanic Gardens, and we were sort of debriefing, and right outside was a huge wedding taking place. And the idea, in the service for a wedding, there was a phrase, Od yishama ba'arei Yehuda, may it soon be heard in the hills of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem, the sound of joy and of happiness, the voice of the bride, the voice of the groom. Even during this difficult time, people find ways to bring joy, to make joy, to get married, to celebrate, because they're not going to allow this to destroy them. It was a fitting way to end our trip. So I'm going to stop here and ask if you have any questions or comments that you want to talk about. So please, yeah, Jan.
Why did you say that the government didn't do anything for 2 months, and then all of a sudden they did? I don't know.
Well, okay, so the question for those online is saying, why did I say that the government did nothing for 2 months? The government is completely dysfunctional right now in Israel. You need to understand the Netanyahu government, the coalition that was put together, is a far-right coalition that is made up largely of ultra-Orthodox parties and far-right parties. When this happened, when the attack happened, the government and the army was caught totally off guard, and the entire state rose up against them. They have been ineffectual in doing anything other than, and I'm saying this, I'm not the only one saying this, they have been totally ineffectual in meeting the needs of its people, and it's a shame. It's a disgrace and a disgust. That's why I said, finally, I mean, look, for 2 months you've had volunteers. You can't hold a volunteer thing for 2 months, so the government is finally beginning, I'm hearing, to step up. But it's slow. That's what it's horrific. And there will be new elections as soon as this is over. Please.
Could you talk more about the debate about the hostages and the moral implications as well as the practical
Yeah.
implications of how we're going to get them back?
The question is, talk about the debate about the hostages and the moral implications of how we're going to get them back, or, So I think there's a tension at play here, because everyone understands in Israel, and really, if you think about it logically, Hamas is a terror organization that is, their main goal is not meeting the needs of the Palestinian people. Look, this war could be stopped tomorrow if Hamas said we're going to return all the hostages and leave. They won't. They are committed to destroying the state of Israel. That is part of what they are. And the Jewish people, by the way. They're not just, if you look at their charter, it doesn't just say, we want to destroy the state of Israel. We want to destroy and the Jewish people. And anyone who is not, this is ISIS. Hamas is basically ISIS. They are funded by Iran. They are a proxy of Iran now, as is Hezbollah in the north. And so there's no question that Hamas needs to be destroyed. That is the goal of this war. Because why is Gaza the quote-unquote largest open-air prison in the world, which is the phrase that's used to describe Gaza? Gaza is that way, it's closed off because of the danger that Hamas represents. That the rulers of... Now, when in, I think it was 2006, we gave Gaza back. Israel occupied the Gaza Strip since 1967. In the aftermath of the Lebanese War and Ariel Sharon's policies, the decision was made to unilaterally withdraw from Gaza and put this is also following the Oslo Accords, and to give the Palestinian Authority the ability to run both the West Bank and Gaza, eventually create a Palestinian state using Gaza and the West Bank. Elections were held in Gaza. Hamas narrowly won, not by a large majority. They took over and they went out and started purging and murdering the Palestinian Authority. And they then started launching attacks, brutal attacks into Israel, which meant that Israel had no choice but to defend itself, not just rockets, but also terrorist incursions. So they built walls around Gaza. Notice that Gaza also borders Egypt, and Egypt does not let anybody out because Egypt also, the Muslim Brotherhood was a huge issue, which is Gaza is another part of that. So that's the rationale for destroying Hamas, not Gaza. And we're looking at every night the reports, these very difficult things to see of the destruction occurring in Gaza of innocent civilians who are caught in the crossfire. The reason they're caught in the crossfire, I will answer your question, I promise. The reason they're caught in the crossfire is because Gaza has deliberately embedded itself within the civilian population. So, the question is, the longer it takes to destroy Hamas, which is the goal of this military campaign, the more time Hamas will have to regroup. Which is why the ceasefire came to an end, because Israel did not, first of all, Hamas violated the terms, among other things. But Israel understands that the more time Hamas has, the more they will be able to rearm themselves and reattack Israel. There are those on the far right of the government who said, let's just level Gaza. And yes, the price of that is going to be the hostages. They won't say that. Last night I saw in the news there was a huge altercation between Netanyahu, who met, and some of the ministers who met with families of hostages who are demanding save the hostages. I mean, look, the tension is, if your child is being held captive by Gaza, by Hamas in Gaza, and you're bombing, you're going to hurt my family members. And so the tension becomes between winning the war and saving the hostages. Hamas understands that, which is why they took hostages in the first place. They killed and murdered and raped and beheaded 1,400. They kept 250 34 or something like that. So that is a tension. Now, that's why we study the laws of Pidyon Shvuim, redeeming captives, which is a very important mitzvah, but at what price? And that is the tension. And this is not a black and white answer. But there are those in the government, the far right-wing government, who say, just level Gaza, make it into a parking lot. And others who say we can't do that, which is one of the reasons that statement that I read from the Israeli Reform Rabbinic Association is so important, that we have to revere life of all. And the people who are saying that are racist, very racist. People like Itamar Ben-Gvir and others in the current Netanyahu government, who were actually prohibited from being in the government because they were followers of Rabbi Meir Kahane, who was expelled from Israel because of and his party was outlawed because of its racist views, are now back in power. That's what we're seeing happening in Israel right now, which is why this government is so ineffective and so self-absorbed. Sorry, that's the answer I'm going to give you. Wendy.
So, given what you're saying, and we're here,
Yeah.
as American Jews, and we're watching all of this unfold, and we're watching all the repercussions that are happening in this country as a result, what can we do as Reform progressive Jews who are feeling that tension? I mean, how do we respond here?
So the question for those online are saying, given the situation in Israel, how do we respond as Reform progressive Jews to what's happening in Israel? That's the question. I think there are several answers. Number one, the war is not just happening in Israel. We're seeing it playing out here on the streets of our cities. I wasn't here when the JNF conference, but I understand that groups like Jewish Voice for Peace and Students for Justice in Palestine, which are basically the same organization, marched in the streets and picketed the Jewish National Fund convention. What? Okay. And the social media attacks, the canards, the anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic rhetoric. And let me take a step to the side, and I will answer your question. Is every person who speaks out against the state of Israel anti-Semitic? No. No. There is a lot of room, and I certainly have been doing it myself, criticizing the Israeli government, the Netanyahu government. However, so I think, and I don't know, I don't have a great answer to your question, Wendy. I'm sort of riffing as I'm going here, but I think the most important thing that we have to do is bear witness. Bear witness to the fact that we are people who care about the humanity of every human being, and I think we need to give the message that this is not a war against Palestinians, it's a war against Hamas that is oppressing the Palestinians as well as trying to destroy the state of Israel. The more we can say that, the more we can get that message out. Now, there are people, because of the massive propaganda that is being fed and that is being inserted into every aspect of life, people aren't going to look at facts. And the other problem is that people like to see black and white, especially in our society today. This is not a black and white issue. It's a very complicated issue. There's a long history. And you look at Gaza and say it's an open-air prison. Well, it looks like it. Why is it an open-air prison? Nobody asked that question. What is the history that brought it that way? So we have to bear witness to and try and teach as much as we can what that history is and why this came to be. Who is Hamas? When you say from the river to the sea, Palestine must be free. Now, I read an interesting article, a couple of them, that says, as Jews and Arabs, let's say, or Palestinians, we hear things differently. Language is powerful, right? I'll give you an example. When a Jew says the word Messiah and a Christian says the word Messiah, it's the same word, but it means very different things. And there are those who are saying that when Palestinians say from the river to the sea, Palestine must be free, that means that you need to have a democratic state. I don't necessarily believe that, but some people can say that. When we hear that, it means that we want to get rid of the Jews. But we have to listen to each other. We have to talk to each other. We have to find ways to do that and model that. that we are supporters of Israel, we are Zionists, we understand why this is happening, we grieve for the loss of life like everyone else, but we also understand that that we as Americans know very well that, we waited too long to go into World War II. We waited until we had no choice. And this is a war of time. The more time this war goes on, the better it's going to be for Hamas. Because world opinion is going to be changed. World opinion is going to people are going to get tired. They're going to get weary. These horrible scenes we're seeing playing out on our television screens are going to make it more and more difficult, even for those who support Israel in the White House right now, to continue that support. The messages we're hearing of, careful of civilians, don't to Israel, could be the beginning of something that's going to ramp up. So how do we deal with it, Wendy? I think by listening to others and also standing strong in our support, by speaking out when we see injustice, and by demonstrating and keep repeating the fact that this is not a war against Palestinians, this is a war against Hamas, and that the biggest enemies of the Palestinian people are themselves Hamas. And we're seeing that actually happening in Israel. I mean, there's an Arab member of Knesset, a very brave Arab member of Knesset, who has condemned Hamas publicly, which is he's risking his life by doing that, because there are those in Arab society who will try and kill him, and his life is in danger. We've seen that happen to Sadat. We saw that happen to Rabin. We've seen it happen that extremists want to do that. So I think we have to condemn extremism of any kind wherever it is. How do we deal with the rhetoric that we're seeing playing out on college campuses, the things that are on social media? I happen to think that some of the anti-Zionist memes and themes are going to get old soon, as people understand more and more and they're given opportunities to hear the message, but it's going to take some time and it's not going to happen overnight. That's the best answer I can give you, Wendy. I asked the same question. Please.
So Wendy and anybody else here, I received this phenomenal app, and it's called Tikva.
Tikva is the app, when you hope.
I think when I first got it, even 4 days after October 7th, I think I sent it to you.
I'll repeat it.
Black and to the other clergy. So it was given to me by a friend in Israel, and it really is phenomenal because a group of young Israelis said, okay, this world opinion is turning immediately, against Israel. So what can we do? And these are people in the film industry and, other professionals, and they created this app. It's Tikva International.
Okay, so I just want to, people online can't hear you. So Leslie's talking about an app called Tikva International that was created by Israeli filmmakers and artists to talk about and to present the other side. And, I often hear that Israel has lost the PR battle, right? The reality is that Israel is working very hard to counter the propaganda and slanders that are being levied against it. But there are certain things, it's just the huge amount, and you question where this is coming from. This is being funded by Iran, probably from Russia as well. I think we're seeing that happening as well, who wants to destabilize the West, and Israel is a symbol of the West. And so this app is called Tikva, and it's a great app, but it's one of many ways we can do it.
But the point that I really want to make about
Yeah.
is that if you receive the information, like just the other day, I heard, you could hear it elsewhere, but it was on the app, I heard the son of Hamas talking at the UN,
Yeah.
and in clear support of
Right.
Israel.
So the problem with that, Leslie, is, and I don't disagree with that. So Leslie said that the son of Hamas is speaking at the UN, who is, but he also has an agenda too. He's a fundamentalist Christian, and that comes from the far right in America. So I question some of that as well. Not that I don't agree with. No, right. But he is funded by and actively promoted by the ultra far right fundamentalist Christian Zionist movements. which are supporting Israel right now. So I have no problem with that, although their goals are very different than our goals as well. Please.
Rabbi, when you were traveling in Israel, I'm assuming you traveled by motor coach?
Yes, we traveled by motor coach in Israel, yes.
Through your lens, and not at the stops, but what you kind of saw in between.
Oh, yeah, great question.
So we've been in Israel several times, and I have this vision of normalcy.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine that vision of normalcy still can exist.
Okay, so the question is, yeah. The question is, sorry, I just want people to hear. The question is, as we were traveling through Israel, what did we see in between the various stops that sort of gave us hope or gave us pause or that we saw? I'll give you two examples. One of which is, as we're driving, there are these places where soldiers are go to assemble to go up to their units. Either they're on leave, they're on reserve duty. Remember, there are soldiers who are in their 70s now on reserve duty doing things. I mean, everyone in the country is there were so many people who volunteered, they had to turn 100,000 people away. Okay? On the side of the road, there are people giving away hot meals for soldiers. There are people who set up like porta potties and soup and coats and warm clothing, so that there is an incredible outpouring of love and support that we're seeing. You don't see that normally. I mean, soldiers are normal in Israel, but this is a special time. So that's one of the things that I saw. The other thing that I saw, that's the other side of that, is, I don't have a picture of this, but it's funny. We went to a mall in Beersheba just to stop to get something to eat. And all the stores are closed. There's one or two restaurants open. And there, I don't know if you've ever seen this, but there's a mall, I don't know what it is, but there is a fountain that is the kitschiest thing I've seen in my life. It's a fountain that shows the Israelites leaving Egypt, and there's like Moses standing like this, and somebody carrying the bones of Joseph. It was just so incredibly. It looked like something out of a sort of a warped Disneyland. And also the fountain had two walls of water that looked like they were parting the Red Sea and walking. So the fountain was turned off, and it looked very sad. It just looked very funny and out of place. So there are parts of Israel life that have just stopped. And there are other parts, like in Tel Aviv, that is bustling. Dafka, that's a Hebrew word that means just in spite of, to show that we're going to allow life to go on. But I think, another thing I saw, I was going to put that picture. We were driving through an Orthodox neighborhood in Jerusalem, and people have picket signs, right? So what did the picket signs say? No telephones with internet or movies. That's what they were picketing. Like the war didn't even exist. So there are certain communities that are just oblivious, especially in the ultra-Orthodox community. We did not go to the West Bank. We did not go to any Arab communities except for that one Bedouin village. One was a matter of time, one was a matter of safety. I don't think it's safe right now to go to a Palestinian area. There's a lot of instability. We did not go to any war zones. This was not the point of that trip. And then again, of course, the refugees you see everywhere. And people have taken them into their homes, into hotels. That was the most powerful thing that we saw that was different than other times we'd been there. Other questions, please.
Two questions.
Yeah.
The rest of the statement you read, how much support is there in that? And second, is there a coalition ready to actually have this two-state solution when Netanyahu finally gives up?
Great question. The first question was, given the statement I read from Aram, the Israeli Reform Rabbis Association, how many people support that? And number two, is there a coalition ready once the Netanyahu government falls to implement a two-state solution? There's a lot of debate as to whether a two-state solution is still viable. Oslo failed. The PA, the Palestinian Authority, is ineffective. They're corrupt. They're not as corrupt as Hamas, but they are corrupt. We know that. But they're all that they have right now. I don't see at the end of this war is going to result in a two-state solution. God, no. I do think the best outcome of this war, if there is a best outcome of this war, is number one, the hostages will be freed, and number two, Hamas will be decimated, and there'll be new elections in Gaza. And I mean, there's two things. There's two competing forces at work in Gaza right now. One of them is the Gazans, the Palestinians who understand that they have been abused by Hamas. There are some, but there's also thousands of people who have died. We don't, by the way, the numbers that you're hearing, they may be true, they may not be true. We don't know. It's coming from Hamas. So, but we know that there's been terrific loss of life, whether it's tens of thousands or 2,000, we don't know. But some of those numbers have to be suspect. But people are angry, and are we creating a whole new generation of new terrorists? That's a very definite possibility. So the work of not just healing, but of teaching, of educating, of soul searching, of doubting, as Michael Marmer taught us, has to work. And are there people in place? I look at someone like Gilad Kariv, Rabbi Gilad, who is a compassionate, brilliant thinker. There are many people in Israel right now who can be. Unfortunately, those who are in power now are not. So I don't know the answer to your question. A bigger question is, what will the next government look like? There's no time to think of that because they're at war. That'll be the next step.
The longer we're in war, that keeps Netanyahu in power.
The longer they're in war, that keeps Netanyahu in power. That is true. There are those who believe that there are going to be elections before the war is over because what has happened, especially given the tremendous failure and that the knowledge now that they knew that the plans were and they ignored them, that cost 1,400 brutal murders, plus the hostages. That is probably unforgivable. Unforgivable. Freddie.
That's what gets me. I wonder how long all these tunnels were being built, and the Israeli intelligence should be right on top of for years, and knowing that certain levels of authority
Right.
had that warning.
So the question is that that we knew that these tunnels were being built for years, and the Israeli government had the knowledge. Why didn't they do something about it? Well, we're seeing the cost of doing something about it right now. We have no choice. I mean, everybody understood that going in and getting rid of Hamas was going to cause horrible loss of life. We know that, and nobody wanted to do that, but they had no choice. I didn't get to your first question, by the way. I will. I just remembered about the statement. But now there's no choice. And what the IDF understands is that they're in there, they may as well finish it. If they don't finish the job, as horrific as it's going to be, and it is horrific, you cannot rejoice in the death of innocents. What's happening in Gaza is terrible. Full stop. And it is Hamas's fault. Full stop.
How many leaders do they need to get? Because it was just in the news that they're very close to knowing where the top Hamas leader is. And
I don't know the answer to that. That's above my pay grade, Freddie. So the question was the statement that was made by Maram. How many people agree with it or saw it? It was made to the Reform movement, which is relatively small, however, is growing in Israel. And I think, the growth that we're seeing in the Reform movement in Israel is, it used to be kind of a joke. There were a few congregations, mostly of Americans. Now we're seeing I'm going to use the word indigenous Israeli Reform movement that is growing and is thriving in Israel right now. I think the work that these local rabbis are doing in communities, the work that the Reform movement has done in presenting a face of morality, tradition, modernity is catching on. In times of crisis, people look for faith, and the rabbinate and on the far right has turned off so many people that I do believe that the Reform movement has a wonderful opportunity now. And that, by the way, is our job to help support them, that we must support them. So I can't give you numbers because I don't know, but what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing and what I'm praying for is that to happen. Oh, God, it's already 7. Let's take one more question. Yeah.
So now that you're back in Denver,
Yeah.
you have relationships obviously with members of our community who have and have not stepped up for us.
Right.
The world of Instagram activism. What do you feel like you need to do now here?
Thank you for that question, Julie. The question was, now that I'm back in Denver, and we see the issues that we are facing internally as the Jewish people, use the word Instagram activism, anti-Zionism within the Jewish community and outside the Jewish community, what do we have to do here? I think there are several things, and I already see it happening. I think we have to redouble our efforts to teach history, to teach what Zionism is and what Zionism isn't, to be honest about as I'm trying to be tonight, about the problems in Israel. It's not a utopia, but it is a remarkable place. To do all that we can. We are, and I'm curious, I'd like to see a show of hands. We are thinking about bringing a small group to go to Israel in February. And the goal would be to volunteer and to study with leaders of the movement. How many of you might be interested, I'm curious, to go? Okay, well, we're talking like 15 to 20 people, so that's a good example. So there's no promises, no plans in place, but we are just starting to do this. We're talking about it among our team. I think it's an important mitzvah to go when it's safe to do so. I felt safe when I was there. I was there during a ceasefire. So let's remember that. But I would have felt safe even if that wasn't in place, because we would never put anyone in active danger. So I think traveling is important. Bringing people in is important. We're also talking about bringing in via Zoom educators in Israel to talk to us, to tell us what's happening on the ground. You know, I can give you my impressions, but I'm an American. I'm a rabbi who has a very specific point of view. I'm not an expert living on the ground. I know a lot, but I don't know enough. So I want to learn myself. So we're talking about creating classes, programs. We need to lobby our Congress people. We need to have programs. We need to work with organizations on the ground, whatever the organizations you like to work with, whether it's APAC or JNF or J Street or JCO or whatever the organizations that you like to support. And I also believe that we as a congregation, we're seeing a resurgence in people who are coming, that people feel a need for spiritual community, and that we have to provide that as well, and we are committed to doing that. I'm going to stop here. This is not the end of the conversation. Thank you all for coming, and pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Thank you. Go home.